And I think about the story of Jonah and the whale, where he tries to run away from his destiny, but then life takes him down, right, in the form of a whale, where he spends 3 days in the belly of the whale. Okay. Now, did Jonah really spend 3 days in the belly of a whale? I'll let you all determine that in the comments section, and you guys can get into a heated Facebook-like discussion about whether or not that's accurate. No matter what, metaphorically, what is that? That's the tunnel, right?
Welcome to the Better Than Rich Show with your hosts, Andrew Biggs and Mike Abramowitz. The Better Than Rich Show helps ambitious leaders who are on a mission to leave the world better than they found it, change their perspective on what's important, increase their income and impact, and systemize their life and business. If you've ever struggled with finding your purpose, have felt disconnected or distracted, or found yourself going through the motions, this show will remind you that what you do matters and will re-inspire you to chase your highest dreams. It's time for you to become better than rich.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Better Than Rich Show. I'm your host, Andrew Biggs, and I'm here with my co-host, Mike Abramowitz. Mike, how are you today?
Things are going great. I'm really excited for this topic. We have a two-part series. This is part one of the two parts, and this is something that you taught me at my first immersion event back in San Francisco, and it is transformed just the way that I've thought about the evolution and the development of me as a man, and also to relate with women. So super excited to dig into Lifecycle of a Man, Lifecycle of a Woman. Today's episode, specifically Lifecycle of a Man. I want to kick it right to you, though, because you're the one who taught me this. Why is it important, today's episode, Lifecycle of a Man, for people to understand this paradigm of what it means to kind of go through the different stages of development as a man?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've never learned the life cycle of a man, today we're going to do a big overview. A lot of this comes from the work that Allison Armstrong has done. If you want to check out her work, where she talks a lot about masculine, feminine energy, the life cycle of men, the life cycle of women, how it's different, how it's the same. And, when I learned this, it really was a paradigm shift for me. And one of the reasons we also want to bring it to you in podcast form is that every single time that I teach this, there is a very, very big reaction from the crowd. Everybody loves this. A lot of times we send out surveys following an event or something like that, and we say, hey, what were your favorite talks? Go ahead and rank these. And very, very frequently, this one's near the top of people's lists. And the reason is that modern culture does a very poor job of helping us understand where we fall into the tribe. It does a very poor job of helping us understand rites of passage, and when we've moved and transitioned from one identity that served us in the past to a new one that we're now taking on. And so this is a really, really important lesson, again, particularly for men, especially today. Next week, we'll do Life Cycle of a Woman. But when you understand where you're at in your developmental journey as a man, you can start to understand, what do I need to do to really glean the lessons from this particular stage that I'm in and move on to the next one of maturity. And ultimately, this is like the journey of fulfillment. If you want to be a man who's going to be fulfilled in this world, you should probably be progressing on this journey. If you're not progressing and you're stuck at a particular stage, that's going to definitely hurt you. It's going to hurt you financially. It's going to hurt you in your fulfillment. It's going to hurt you in your relationships. And ultimately, you're just going to be very dissatisfied if you are stuck at a stage for too long. So that's my answer. But what do you think?
Well, I think it's really going to be excellent content for our audience to hear. I think it's going to be unique, something new, something that you may have not heard ever before, that just like what it did for me when I learned it, it had, like you said, a paradigm shift. So, and especially as the audience is listening, I think a lot of individuals are listening. It'll make sense when Andrew talks on it. You might be a knight right now. All right. A knight slaying a bunch of dragons. That's where you are, more than likely, not 100%, but more than likely. And you're probably have slayed a bunch of dragons, and you're transitioning into the tunnel of saying, I feel like there's a bigger reason why I'm here. And when Andrew will kind of methodically take us through what that means in context, you'll probably be able to say, yep, that shit is so true, Mike. So I'm excited to go through this and have Andrew walk us through what a knight is, what this tunnel is, what is this all about? And obviously, taking us through the different stages. So Andrew, where does this start? Where does in the life cycle of a man, what's the first place? What's the first, maybe what lead us up until a knight? Because I feel like a lot of our listeners are in that knighthood transitioning into the title. So if you could lead us through birth until getting into that knighthood and getting to the tunnel, what would you
absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's pretty obvious where every man starts, and we start as boys, right? So if I look at my 7-year-old son, my 5-month-old son, they're boys. And they're boys through and through. Basically, the way you want to kind of look at this first stage is kind of, prepubescent, sort of boy energy. And what is life about when you're a boy? Life's about having fun. Life's about meeting with your friends. It's about sleepovers. It's about sugar. It's about eating pizza. It's about playing video games. It's about, trying sports, getting out there a little bit, learning a little bit about the world, but it's mostly about having fun, right? It's mostly about just that joyous energy that little boys have. There's an Airbnb next door, so there's people who come in and out, and sometimes the owner uses it, sometimes he Airbnbs it. And last night, I got home and I pulled in the driveway, and Eli is just chatting it up with the Airbnb people, and the Airbnb folks who are visiting. They're just laughing their asses off at how funny he is, and he's like, "Hey, watch me how far I can ride my bike, and watch me how far I can ride my skateboard, and hey, can I tell you a joke?" And it's just this joyous sort of energy that's all about fun, right? It's not about work, it's about fun. So that's the boy. Then of course, we all have that moment in our lives where things start to change in our bodies, and things start to change in how we view the world, how we view the opposite sex or the same sex, depending on your orientation. But we start to go through our puberty years, and that's when things start to shift. Generally speaking, this next stage, we kind of peg it around, puberty to, let's say, around 16, 18 or so. And this is called the page. And throughout this, we're going to use kind of like these medieval, analogies. So this is called the page. And the page is somebody who, wants to be a man, but definitely isn't ready yet, right? Wants to be a knight, wants to go out on conquests and, have real achievements in the world, and actually, have these achievements matter, to go slay a dragon and to bring back, the dragon head and throw it down, and then cavort with the boys in the stables, and, have a few drinks and talk about your conquests in battle, or your conquests with women. But ultimately, the page really isn't ready, right? And so it's like those awkward years where you're trying to figure out, man, you kind of look up to the knights who are out there actually crushing it. And you kind of try to find accomplishments that maybe could build your confidence a little bit, and maybe help you feel a little, like, okay, well, hey, I'm on the journey. I'm in the right path. You're looking for these signs and signals. And so you kind of it's kind of similar to being a knight, which is actual conquest, but just the conquests don't matter as much. It's like, hey, I wonder who can hold their breath underwater for the longest, right? And that's the competition you win. You didn't win a competition that mattered. You won something silly, like who can jump off the tallest, limb of the tree. And so the page is this sort of awkward years where you're learning about yourself. You're starting to try to develop an identity, but oftentimes kind of struggling to do so. And then the next one is the knight that we can get into next. But Mike, anything you want to share about the boy or the page years that feels relevant to you?
Well, what I have in my notes is the boy is kind of this imaginative, playful, type of stage where anything's possible, that's kind of what I have in my notes as I'm reflecting back. And that page year is like where you witness what adulthood looks like with envy of like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to experience that. That's something that it's chasing significance, chasing after something. That's kind of what I showed up in my notes, and I totally relate to that because I was kind of one of those awkward kids. I was overweight, the pimples, the freckles, the glasses. At one point, I had the fist fights, like, so
Nice.
I just remember, that's that fight for significance, during that chapter of life. So I relate to that fully, and seeing like my older brothers as those knights going out and telling all their stories of achievements, and I'm super excited for you to transition into the knight. So
Sure.
So I definitely fully relate to that. Tell us about the knight, because the knight, from what I remember and what I look at my notes, and this is why it's so relevant, is sometimes knights, you can meet like an 80-year-old knight, and then you can meet an 18-year-old knight. And this idea of knighthood lives so much amongst the men that this transition from knighthood into this tunnel, I'm really I'm fired up for you to just to jam on this, please. So enlighten us, please.
Absolutely. And I think you nailed the Paige energy, right? It's like that you're looking upon the older folks with envy, like, oh, I can't wait till I drive a car. Like, you're a freshman and like all you want to do is be a senior, right? So status is super important, and how you kind of stack rank, but it's ultimately on these like very small scales that really don't matter. So the knighthood is a really important stage as well. And this is where we actually start to prioritize real accomplishments and real achievements. And, you're out into the world, whether it's getting great grades and graduating, with honors, or it's going out and getting a great job, or it's going out and making a bunch of money, making a bunch of sales. I'm sure a lot of you listening are like, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I want to make 6 figures, and then I want to make 7 figures, and then I want to make 8 figures. And it's like these sorts of accomplishment driven things. And hey, I ran a half marathon. Now I want to run a marathon. Then I want to run an Ironman, and then I want to run a 100-mile race. It's like, okay, cool. Like, these sorts of achievements and kind of going after things is super important. And for a few reasons. I mean, if you don't do this, there's a couple of things that I think are really important about this stage. And we're also going to share some of the downsides to it. But the positives are you actually get good at something, right? Like, if you go out and achieve something, you are actually good at it, right? And you're building confidence that you can follow through on things. So it's super important to have this stage of development where you're going out and testing your power. How skilled am I? And let me actually continue to sharpen my sword as I go try to slay dragons, whatever those dragons may be, right? Now, part of the challenge, though, right, with knights is that this can kind of become a shallow sort of thing, right? Where you're chasing after accomplishments, you're chasing after achievement. It's all about achievement. And, ultimately, again, that status and how you look and how other people perceive you becomes super important. And so your entire self-worth is basically wrapped up into being an overachiever, whether that's in business, or it's I'm the funniest person, or I get the most girls, or whatever it is that's part of that identity. That is really the only thing that's driving it. And there's something really shallow, right, about always chasing that next accomplishment. And, one of the very unique things, or not unique things, I should say, that comes up when I'm speaking to knights who are starting that transition that you're referencing, Mike, into that next stage, is they start to feel like, man, every subsequent achievement that I get, it just doesn't excite me anymore, right? It's starting to lose its luster. It's like, okay, I hit $1 million. Now what? I guess I got to hit $2 million, right? And so there's always another thing that they're chasing after. But at a certain point, it's not that exciting, because what they really want can't be found in the achievements, can't be found in the accomplishments, can't be found in sleeping with another woman, or whatever that looks like for you. And so you start to question, like, what's it really about? Like, what am I doing with my life? Yeah, I'm successful, quote unquote, on paper, but am I really happy? Am I really fulfilled? Is this really getting me what I want or not? And so you start to question that. And that's when you enter the tunnel. And we'll talk about the tunnel here in a second. But the tunnel leads into princehood, and that's the next stage. But Mike, there's so much in this night one. And the knights and princes is really who are listening to this. The men who are listening, I should say, probably fall into these two camps. And so it's super relevant that we help each and every one of you understand this. But Mike, when you think about the knight stage, what else is relevant, and what do you think of this, or any questions that come up for you?
Yeah, knighthood for me is where you are tapping into your full ambition. Like you are ambitious. you're chasing after things, you're learning about like this, the travel in the world. The first evers is what shows up for me for a night. It's like trying to accomplish all my personal bests. First time going to a certain location, first time buying this new possession, first time experiencing something new, right? Like that's what a lot of the night is going after. And it's so important because if you don't satisfy that knighthood, then what's going to happen is you're going to get into this facade of the Lord, or the facade of the prince, which is, Andrew, you'll jam on this, but this facade of regret, of this feeling of, wow, I missed out. It's like you might say, again, my royal oats. I used to watch Coming to America. It's like go soil your royal oats or whatever. And if you ever see Coming to America, goes from he's a prince, but he's like, I got to go to New York, and he goes to Brooklyn or whatever. But and just experiencing this version of life and of development is so critical, because you don't want to enter that marriage or enter parenthood or enter into the 40, 50, 60-year-old version of you without slaying those dragons and reaching for that ambition and finding that accomplishment focus. Because then you get to that point of you're married. That's where that midlife crisis comes in. You see the 60-year-old dude that's divorced 3 or 4 times with a wife who's 25 or half his age. And, it's like, there's nothing wrong with that. But the reason why he got there is because more than likely he didn't satisfy his knight passions and ambition and achievements in that earlier stage in life. So therefore it's like he's trying to satisfy it now. More than likely, there's other reasons probably as well, but
yeah, absolutely. And I think I love the word ambition, and that's basically what you're building out here. And again, it's a super important stage of development. These are not to be skipped; they're not to be dishonored. Each of them has their positives and their negatives, and just know that if you don't go out and slay some dragons, then you're going to question your capacity to slay dragons later, right? And, you're going to just have to make up for this later in life if you try to mature too quickly. So don't be afraid to be ambitious. Don't be afraid to have goals. Don't be afraid to have a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal that you're going after. And even if everyone in your life's like, that's crazy, that's stupid, you'll never achieve it. It's like, this is the time to be irrationally committed to your goals and to say, yeah, I don't really care what you think. I'm going to go after it. And even if I fail, I'm going to fail, trying my absolute best on the battlefield.
And I'm going to learn a bunch.
Exactly. And you sharpen your sword as you're going out and slaying these dragons. So knighthood, all about achievement and accomplishment and putting some trophies on the wall that you can, build some confidence on from later. But what else, Mike?
And then what's going to happen is eventually you're going to realize a lot of this achievement in the outside world, it's not as meaningful. It's losing some of its substance. Oftentimes the knight, how they realize that it's not all like that's not what everything that life is all about, is typically some circumstance will come their way. That could be a death of a loved one, or an injury, or getting sick, or a bankruptcy, or like at some point in time, they're going to reach a place where they're like, shit, I attached my self-worth to my money, to my relationship, to my career. And then that thing that they were attached to might be taken away. So they go through this intrinsic journey. It's very dark. It's fucking scary. It's not a cool place. That's the tunnel. Andrew, enlighten us about the tunnel.
Yes, the tunnel, everyone's favorite stage. So basically, the next stage on the other side of the tunnel is called the Prince. And, that's where we want to eventually get there. There are some further stages too. But the tunnel is kind of this dark area where we're questioning things, right? Because ultimately, this is going from a page to a knight is a little bit of a rite of passage, right? It's like, okay, hey, you're on the varsity team now, congratulations, go after it. But you're ultimately not taking on any sort of real responsibility other than how do I just go and, accomplish things. And the tunnel, though, is interesting because we're leading into taking on more energy that's actually collective, that's actually impacting others, where there's more mission involved. And ultimately, guys, you got to have a mission in life. Men, if you're listening and you don't know what your purpose is, if you don't know what your mission is, you got to figure that out, right? And again, maybe you're a knight and you're like, I don't, need to worry about that right now. I just need to hit my next sales goal. Fair enough. But if you are in the tunnel or beyond, you have to start asking, why am I here? What's my purpose? Because you are not going to be satisfied by just another shiny trophy or just another, attractive woman or just another, Rolex on your wrist or another vacation. Okay. At a certain point, you've done enough, right? There's enough trophies. There's enough dragons on the wall that you've slayed. And another one really isn't going to make a big impact. And so you start to question these things. You go through the tunnel, and the tunnel is where you're basically going through an identity transformation, because everything that you valued before, you're starting to question those values. You started to, before you valued significance, status, material looks and everything like that. What we're shifting to is a much more deeply rooted identity that is in the vein of impact, right? Purpose, responsibility, balance, fulfillment. And so we're switching completely what our value sets are. And that's really what that tunnel is. And sometimes you're torn, right? Some parts of you kind of want to, just stick with what's easy and what's known. And some parts of you being drawn towards this other one. There might even be relationships that are kind of keeping you stuck in this knighthood for too long, right? And that's, again, where you can meet that 40, 50, 60-year-old knight, because nobody ever told him that there was more to life than hitting the strip club and making $1 million a year. And so he's like, okay, well, fair enough. I guess it's not that bad. I'll just keep doing this. But there is so much more. And so this is oftentimes a time for you to question your circle of influence. If I'm a knight who's entering the tunnel and I'm only hanging out with knights and they're calling me 4 nights a week to go out, and drink and party and hang out, is that really what I want to do? Is that really what's serving my highest good anymore? Hey, I had my fun. I, sowed my wild oats, so to speak. But it's like, maybe you've had enough of that. And this is a time for you to question that. So you enter the tunnel. How long is the tunnel? I don't know, as long as it needs to be, okay? It could be a few months. It could be a few years, honestly, where you're questioning these things. A lot of times it depends on who you're hanging out with and what sort of leadership you're receiving during this time. But that tunnel could last anywhere from a few months to a few years. And it's dark, it's lonely, you're starting to question everything. But, like Winston Churchill said, if you find yourself in hell, just keep going. And eventually you will find the other side of that tunnel. Mike, what comes up for you when you think about the tunnel and the importance of this journey through it?
Yeah, I'd like to hear from you about what your tunnel experience was. I'll share mine very quickly. And I think back to my knighthood was, I had 3 houses, rental properties I was renting out. I was, dating a really awesome girl. I was, working, I got my degree, working in my career, doing really well. And then like this tunnel came where my best friend at the time was killed in a fatal car crash. That girl, we ended our relationship. I was near bankruptcy. My credit score was down to a 400. I lost my money. My net worth was down. So I was about 27, overweight, near broke, like, broken up with, like, it was just that 27-year version of me. And that tunnel took me to about 30, like somewhere in that range. It was a couple of years for me. And the breakthrough came when I went to my first Tony Robbins event. I went to the immersion event. I walked across fire and I was like, all right, this is it. I found my purpose. I found that my mess is my message. And I need to like take all these things from my 20s and spend my 30s like helping this mission of helping other people. And I remember the shift for me back in 2012, 2013. So for me, I specifically remember that tunnel. It was dark. It was scary. It was learning more about me, my identity, who I was, what I was about, why, like I would question a lot of things, and it's a scary place. And I had friends that backpacked Europe for 6 months to figure things out. I listened to Matthew McConaughey in Green Lights, and he just went out and grew a beard and went to the jungle and where nobody would know who he was, so he can just get more clear on who he was as a human. and going into this deep, dark place. And if you listen to Green Lights or read the book, it's beautiful because he says, like, I turned away a $15 million deal because I just didn't want that to be who I was anymore. You know, you think about like Dave Chappelle turned away a $50 million contract. He's like, I'm going away. Like, I got to get more clear on who I am as a man and what my purpose is and why I'm doing what I'm doing. And what's interesting is on the other end of that tunnel, that princehood is, and I know Andrew, you'll jam on this in a moment, but like, that's where we start really getting this flavor of what fulfillment is and this mission that we're on to get into that king status that we're all men is hopefully chasing after. But what was yours? I mean, I'm curious, like your tunnel experience, you know, maybe it wasn't full 3 or 4 years like mine, but I got to lead to believe it was when you were in India.
It was pretty close. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And thanks for that share. I really appreciate it. It's a great way for you all to kind of connect to the energy of what that tunnel looks like. We start to question things. I mean, for me, yeah, it was around the time when I was in India and, you know, building my business initially inside kind of the US. And then we built this business in India, and it just started to get to the point where every subsequent achievement just wasn't cutting it, right? It wasn't exciting. I really started to question my faith. I really started to question even just like, you know, hey, is there any purpose to life? Is there any meaning to life? I would say in some ways, I remember being at a party at our apartment in India. We had a really cool place. It was like the 16th floor overlooking the entire city. It was like 3 bedrooms, really beautiful. It was literally like $500 a month for this like, you know, amazing place, which was wild. But we were at a party, and, you know, one of my friends who I work with, who I was really close with and helped me grow the business, you know, we've had many, you know, discussions over drinks or other substances in the evening, in those days, let's say. And we were chatting quite a bit. And then I remember him kind of leaning over to someone, and he's like, yeah, you know, Andrew talks about this, that, the other. He's a nihilist, right? And I'm like, I'm a nihilist. He's like, really? And I'm like, now that I look back, I remember being offended, which if I'm offended by being called a nihilist, I guess it's not a real nihilist. I guess a real nihilist wouldn't care. But basically, if you're not familiar with what nihilism is, it's like just not caring about anything, and that there's absolutely no purpose in the universe. It's kind of like just the equivalent of what's the point. And I definitely felt like I was there, right? I was at a place where it's like, what's the point of this? What's the point of my existence? What's the point of our existence? What's the point of us floating on this ball, you know, for 80 years hurtling through space when the universe is, you know, 13.7 billion years or whatever. So it's like all of these sort of things were coming at me. And honestly, what really helped me get out was, you know, having Elijah, right? It was one of those moments where it's like, honestly, I probably could have kept going if I hadn't taken on responsibility, and it kind of forced my hand to start to do that. So, you know, that's kind of the tunnel, and that's how you want to be thinking about it. It's like, what's like the moments where you really start to question everything. And, you know, what was nice is when you have when I had a son, it's hard to take that concept seriously, right? And, you know, for instance, if I handed you a baby, right, and I said, take care of it, you wouldn't like try to rationalize that. You wouldn't be like, well, you know, should I really take care of the baby? I mean, at most it's going to live for like 80 years and like then die. So like, what's the point? You know, it's obvious why you should take care of the baby. It's because the baby needs you, right? And so, you know, that was a nice thing to kind of force me into responsibility. And I don't know, maybe even some of you listening can relate to that, you know, being surprised to be a father and then having to step up. So,
and I'm sure during that process, you know, and thanks for sharing, by the way, because that's some of the stuff I didn't even know. And I you know, we're business partners. I'm sure it's what are the other shit? What are the things I don't know?
What else am I hiding? That's right.
Yeah. But it's beautiful because what you said is sometimes life tosses us into the tunnel when we weren't expecting it. You know, like my mom died when I was 20. Like I didn't expect it. You know, so it's like sometimes it's death of a loved one. Sometimes it's an injury. You know, sometimes it's you know, a breakup, whatever it is, and oftentimes that's where you are now in a position to enter the tunnel. Now, because you entered the tunnel, doesn't necessarily mean you make it to the other end. And that's where we find, at least I don't know if you could speak to this, Andrew, where these men enter the tunnel. It gets really uncomfortable. They have this circumstance. Oh, should I have a kid? Oh man, that sucks. This happens. And what do? They retreat back to knighthood and they settle into addictions. They'll settle into the addictions of the video games or the porn or the chasing after women or cheating or whatever it might be, because they're like, this is what's familiar, this is what's comfortable, and that shit was so uncomfortable. I just don't want to. All right, let me dabble back in. It's like, oh no, that shit's too scary. Let me go back, and they retreat. What are your thoughts on this idea? If there's someone listening right now that's like retreating back. What could we say to them? Number one, and maybe like, what's the reasoning as to why it's beneficial for them to push through?
Yeah. I mean, if you're listening and you're kind of flirting with the tunnel and knighthood and princehood, and you're not sure, which direction to go, ultimately what you're really afraid of is stepping up and change, right? You're nervous of what you're going to lose as you're stepping into this next phase. And you're avoiding responsibility, right? You are running away from your destiny. And I think the great story, the way I look at biblical stories oftentimes is the reason that they have stood the test of time is because they matter and they matter to all of us. And I think about the story of Jonah and the whale, where he tries to run away from his destiny, but then life takes him down, right, in the form of a whale, where he spends 3 days in the belly of the whale. Okay, now, did Jonah really spend 3 days in the belly of a whale? I'll let you all determine that in the comments section, and you guys can get into a heated Facebook-like discussion about whether or not that's accurate. No matter what, metaphorically, what is that? That's the tunnel. Right? Like you're going along life, you try to escape, it's going to capture you anyway, right? And you're going to have to spend even more time in the belly of the whale, in the tunnel, before you're spit out ultimately right where you're supposed to be in your destiny. So you can try to run from this, but it's going to chase you down, right? You're trying to basically betray yourself and betray your mission if you do not move forward. And if you keep escaping into these addictions. So no escaping, right? If you try to escape, you're just delaying and you're adding more trauma and more pain that you have to work through once you do eventually come to, right? Or, you might just end up killing yourself because you're addicted to everything and anything and everything. And that's even more tragic. So hopefully I've given you enough reasons to avoid that sort of route. And I'm not saying that every man doesn't go back and flirt a little bit with knighthood from time to time. What I find typically is that people under stress, extreme stress situations, they'll kind of revert back a stage, right? So, if you do kind of find yourself to be a prince and maybe it's even like you're comfortable there, let's say things get really stressful at work and, there's money problems at home and you and the wife are fighting. Yeah, you might find yourself drinking a little bit more than you should, right? So you start to retreat back, when there's stress. The biggest thing I would just say there is don't judge yourself and just try to find your way back onto the right path. Again, a lot of times that's having good people in your life to be able to do that. So here's what I'd say, you have a pretty good sense of what the tunnel is. What's on the other side of the tunnel, right? And what that is, it's called a prince. Okay. And there's 3 different versions of the prince. So we just call them prince stage 1, 2, and 3. So what defines what a prince stage 1 is? And this is where you have kind of transitioned out of the tunnel and you've kind of come out of winter and into spring, and you're starting to recognize, oh my gosh, there's a better way to do this. I can still bring accomplishments, but in the service of something else. Now, you might not know what particularly you're being prepped for in Prince Stage 1. That's a little bit towards Prince Stage 2. But you just know that there is a deeper purpose. You know that there is more meaning. And so you're going on that journey and you're simultaneously kind of learning what you need to learn. A lot of times, I think of Prince Stage 1 as like a preparation for your ultimate mission in life. For me, I think about my time with Epic Impact and Abundant, where I really, had a chance to kind of learn how to be a good coach. To be honest, when I was first a coach, I don't know if I was all that good. I mean, people liked it, but I think I'm way better now. And it's just an opportunity to almost like apprenticeship your mission. And so you might be thinking okay, well, how do I do that? I don't know, but you need to find something that matters and just do good work. Even if you're like, man, I was talking to someone yesterday and they do road shows and, they set up their booths and they, sell different products. And, part of him was like, this is kind of getting old. Am I really making a difference? I stand here all day, every day, and I sell products at a road show. I don't know if this really matters. And I really had to throw it back at him and say, hey, look, it matters. And what about the dignity of a good, hard day's work? And what are you learning, and how is this job preparing you for something in the future, whether it's financially or it's helping you, learn about yourself, or it's helping you define, gain more skills. So this is really what Prince Stage 1 is all about. You start to hang out with more princes who are on the journey to fulfillment and actually finding mission and purpose. But Mike, what comes up for you on the Prince Stage 1?
Well, when I first learned this is when I have my journal, what stage am I in right now in this life cycle? And I put that I'm in stage 1 of Prince because I'm still working through the patterns of embodiment of my values and living to the standards that I want for my kingdom. I've created my core values. So therefore in Prince 1, you create your core values, you learn a little bit about them. I said, I'm learning about my gifts during my journey. I'm fully accepting them and internalizing them at the moment. I feel grounded with purpose and know the desires of what I want, which includes internal strength, external power, giving to my community, creating legacy and impact. And I said, I'm conscious of my COI, my circle of influence, and what's influencing me right now, but not until I conquer the ego and begin to openly receive feedback without judgment and resentment. That's when I'll transition into the stage 2 of Prince. So choosing the right way versus accomplishments. And it's just interesting reflecting back on this, 4 or 5 years ago, and just looking at where I'm at now and just being intentional with embodiment of my core values, embodiment of this mission that I'm on, and serving a higher purpose, willing to receive feedback, not casting judgment, being curious before critical. So at the moment when writing this, I was probably from a level of innocence of man, this is what I want. And this is, I see a disconnect there. And then me right now, looking back on it, it's wow, that was really cool for me to be willing and courageous enough to capture it. Hence why I love journaling so much, because it's like a snapshot of my emotions of where I was at that chapter of my life, learning this lesson. And now fast forward, years later, about 4 or 5 years later, sharing this with other people that can take from this. And I hope you're doing this exercise too. And I would invite you to think, once we kind of wrap up, what stage are you at right now? What stage are you at in your life cycle? What are the gifts that are, what are gifts are being offered to you during this stage of where you're at, and what's needed to get you to the next stage? So that's what's showing up for me. If you want to speak to
I definitely can. I also just want to double click on the values, purpose, habits. What we're really doing during stage 1 is we're preparing for the journey, right? We're in the training center, right, to go on the journey, and we kind of know what our values are and who we are, but we don't really know the vehicle of how to bring our mission into the world. So a lot of times Prince Stage 2 kind of looks like you defining what that vehicle looks like, right? It's actually where your mission and where you're spending the majority of your time kind of starts to align. And maybe it's not even the majority of your time, but it's the majority of your energy, or the majority of, your excess energy, however we want to define that. But it's, you start to really, really find a vehicle that's going to move your mission forward in the world, right? So the birth of Better Than Rich really was kind of like the beginning of the stage 2 for me. It was okay, wow, I've apprenticed, I've understood who I am, who I'm supposed to be, who I need to be, and what my standards are. I have some pretty good healthy habits. Let's begin this journey to where it's actually really what I do for a living is mission driven. And again, this can be at any job, right? You can bring your mission into your position right where you are right now. Maybe you do need to change careers in order to do that, but 90% of the time or more, I would recommend beginning to try to bring your mission into your work on a daily basis and at least give that a shot before you just quit your job and jump into something else. But that's really what stage 2 is about. And I'll just kind of wrap things up and move to stage 3 and the king stage as well. Basically, stage 3 is where you've been on that journey of working on your mission on a daily basis and like putting in the hours and doing the heavy lifting and like just adding value as much as possible and trying to impact people as much as possible and make change as much as possible. But you've been doing that for like 10, 15 years, right? And you can look and you've been like, wow, I've actually created a pretty nice little empire here. I've created a nice little, kingdom for myself, and I think this could be, you have a small business, it's doing pretty well, it's kind of running, you have a staff, you have some employees, you have some status, maybe you're involved in the community, like you've done a good job and you've been a good steward of all the resources and things that have been coming your way. You've built some really strong relationships. You're kind of mentoring people along the way and kind of helping them on their path through knighthood and princehood and showing people the ropes and helping them learn from your mistakes and all of that. And that's like Prince stage 3, right? And by the way, you could be like a billionaire or whatever. Like, I look at Elon Musk or I look at, Mark Zuckerberg or whatever. And it's kind of like, I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg, I kind of put him at like Prince stage 3, to be honest. He's got enough money to be a king, 10 times over. It's not really about how much money you have that determines if you're a king or not, though. And, really the reason I put him at stage 3, and again, I put myself at stage 2, so it's not like I'm saying I'm a king or anything, is like, I don't know, like, is he really going to turn this next step to a king, to be a true king, to where ultimately he did all of this for the betterment of the planet, for the betterment of people, for the betterment of others, or was it kind of ego driven? And it could still be ego driven even at stage 3. And like the difference between the king and stage 3 is the king ultimately decides, yes, I've gotten this far, and now my only job really is to serve. Now my only job is to be a servant to my people. I am the benevolent king who's going to make sure that my people are taken care of, right? And we know people who have done that, and we know people who kind of like clamp up towards the end of their lives, and they actually kind of get hardened and embittered, and maybe they're super rich, but they're super stingy, or whatever that looks like to you. You probably met some people like that. And it's like, man, you have so much wisdom to give, and you're just wasting your latter years just on the golf course with, a few of your buddies. And you're not really giving back. So that's kind of the difference between stage 3 and king. And then the last thing about the king is, they're focused on giving. They're focused on serving. That's really their only purpose, is to make an impact. And they say, hey, I need nothing. I'm completely taken care of. And now all I want to do for the rest of my life is show up for others, and to make an impact on their lives. So that's kind of the tail end of the life cycle, that obviously I do hope one day to be at. Mike, what's coming up for you?
Yeah, one thing that resonates with me is the king is it's the master who doesn't think that they're a master. It's the master who's continually showing up to learn in order to give. And for me, the king that I look up to is, if you follow me, is Tony Robbins, because this is someone who, as his businesses are worth $5-6 billion. He has over 100 different businesses that he has his hands in, but yet he's 60 years old or so and running, these companies, and his net worth is through the roof, but he still shows up to learn, to help humanity, figuring out things with stem cells or health or money, and just to give back constantly. And I admire that. I love the principles that he leads his life by, because he does what he does and just leads from that place is really beautiful. So that's what I would say about King. So for you listening, is just thinking about, is there a role model that does embody what it means to be a king, to give back to the community, to say, you know what, I'm a master, but I also continue to grow. I continue to learn. I continue to evolve because I know the people that are following me are also learning from me still. And I'm going to just keep continuing to evolve until the day I die. And I really love that that principle for the king. I also wanted to mention, if you could just real quick, just double click on the Lord, because the Lord is like this prince who kind of doesn't
veered off the path. Yeah.
Doesn't desire to be this king and just kind of, all right, I did all the hardship, but I'm okay just being complacent. Can you just kind of speak to that? Because I think there might be some people who relate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I like what you said about the king. Another principle that I oftentimes remind people of is that the king is committed to service, right, and growth until the day they die. So it's like you're never stopping being a student, and you're also never stopping being a giver. And what does that look like to you if you're on that journey to being a king? Now, the Lord is basically somebody who stepped off the journey, right? Somebody who got to princehood. Maybe they, got their first house. Maybe they, have a couple kids. Maybe they got a dog. Maybe they, have some investments, right? And they're building their nest egg or something. And what generally the Lord does is they kind of take the foot off the gas. They go, all right, like I've made it. I've arrived. I've grown enough, and look at my success and look around. It's, how can anyone argue with this? And, to be fair, they did do a fair amount of work to get to that place, and to kind of like create this like sort of comfort zone, right? And safety and protection, whether it's in the form of their financials or their gated community or whatever they have there. But what they ended up doing is they step off of the journey of growth. They actually stop really doing a lot of the things that got them there, and they just go into coast mode, okay? Now, if you're listening and you are currently in coast mode, you really got to ask yourself, is it fulfilling? Is it rewarding to be in coast mode? And basically the Lord, kind of said, this is good enough. And the truth is that psychologically that just doesn't work, right? Because when we're in our comfort zone, we have nothing to strive for, then life does start to get meaningless. And then we find ourselves, no matter how much money we have, deeply unfulfilled and heading back towards the addiction model that Mike talked about earlier. So the Lord has stepped off the path, and they basically said, I'm comfortable just being a Lord. I don't need to be a king. Again, it's important to recognize that when we talk about being a king, it's not like you have to be the king of all kings, okay? That would be kind of blasphemous for you to call yourself the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, okay? What we're talking about is have a relatively decent-sized kingdom for yourself. Now, you could also have a decent-sized plot of land, literally or metaphorically as a lord, but ultimately you're not doing it in the service of others. You're just trying to extract, value from others in your life or from, the land that you've acquired. So, Mike, thoughts on the Lord here and how it relates to the king?
Yeah, the Lord is going to grind in order to chill. So they're going to work really hard just so I can do nothing. Where the pursuit of the king, so the pursuit of the Lord, let me work real hard until I don't have to do anything. The pursuit of the king is, let me work hard with a purpose to leave this place better than I found it. That's really what it is. It's like this attraction to legacy. And I think if you're listening to this show, which is the Better Than Rich show, to leave today better than you found it, there's probably a version of you or the whole part of you that says, I really want to have my name be tied to something greater than just my possessions, than just, being here for 80 years and then that's it. That I made a difference in people's lives, that touched the hearts of other people, and that there's other people better and living their purpose and living their passions because of the way I showed up. And those people might be your kids, it might be your significant other, it might be strangers, but there is there's a deep need for kings in our world. And for you as a man, I don't want to use the word it's your responsibility to be a king, but I would say it is your responsibility to pursue the accomplishments and the endeavors and the model of what it means to run a kingdom for your family, for your community, for yourself, for your life, because responsibility is the ability to respond. And once you get through that tunnel and you've done the hard work and you've created these values and you've got this purpose, do something with it. Your people, the people around you need you to step into that.
Beautiful, beautiful. So again, to review: boy, Paige, knight, tunnel, prince. Prince has 3 stages, and then there's the Lord. But ultimately, where we're all headed, where we want to head, is to the king. So I hope that this has been thought-provoking for each and every one of you. I do want to circle back on the questions Mike posed earlier. So make sure that you answer these this week. Maybe even drop them in the comments below, whether it's on your favorite podcast platform, or if you're on YouTube, you can find our video there. We would want to know, what stage are you in now? What are the gifts of this current stage that you still need to glean and take from this stage? And then what do you need to do to ultimately progress to that next stage of development as a man? So men out there, I hope that this has been rewarding. Women out there, send this to the men in your lives, okay? I think they need this, right? A lot of times men need to be spurred along by women in our lives, and that's a good thing. That's part of your role in inspiring us. Well, thanks everyone. This has been a pleasure. Again, if you have any questions, let us know, because this is a thought-provoking episode. Thank you, Mike, for your contributions, and we will see you next week on the Better Than Rich Show. Until then, leave today better than you found it.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the show, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from us, you can follow us on Instagram at betterthan_rich and join our Facebook group at the Better Than Rich Show. Thanks again for listening. We look forward to seeing you next time. And remember, leave today better than you found it.